When I woke up on the morning of my 65th birthday, I had no idea it would be the day that changed everything. I had been planning this party for weeks, carefully choosing the decorations, preparing all the food myself, and making sure every detail was perfect. After all, this wasn't just any birthday. This was supposed to be a celebration of my life, surrounded by the people I loved most in the world, my children, my grandchildren, my extended family, and close friends. I wanted it to be special. I spent the entire morning in the kitchen, flour dusting my apron as I carefully measured ingredients for what would become a 3-layer chocolate cake with vanilla buttercream frosting. The same recipe I had used for every family celebration for the past 30 years. The same cake that had graced birthday parties, graduations, and holidays. My hands moved with practiced precision, creaming butter and sugar, adding eggs one at a time, folding in the dry ingredients with the gentle touch that only comes from decades of experience. As I worked, I thought about how much my life had changed over the years, how I had raised 3 children as a single mother after their father passed away when they were still young, how I had worked 2 jobs to put them through college, sacrificing my own dreams to make sure they had every opportunity I never had, how I had been there for every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every triumph, and every milestone. I had given everything I had to my family, and I believed with all my heart that they loved me the same way I love them. The cake came out of the oven perfectly golden, and as it cooled, I prepared the frosting. I took my time decorating it, adding delicate roses around the edges and writing "Happy 65th Birthday" in elegant script across the top. It wasn't a professional bakery cake, but it was made with love, and that had to count for something. Or so I thought. By afternoon, guests began arriving at my small but tidy home. I had cleaned every surface until it sparkled, arranged fresh flowers from my garden in vases throughout the house, and set up tables with crisp white tablecloths. The living room buzzed with conversation and laughter as family members caught up with each other. Children ran around playing games, and the aroma of my homemade cooking filled the air. Everything seemed perfect. My oldest son, Marcus, arrived with his wife, Jennifer, and they brought their 2 teenage children. My daughter, Patrice, came with her husband and their 3 little ones, who immediately ran to hug their grandmother. My youngest son, David, showed up fashionably late, as always, but with a big smile and an even bigger hug for me. Extended family filled the remaining space. Aunts and uncles and cousins I hadn't seen in months, all gathered together in my honor. For the first few hours, I felt genuinely happy. This was what I had imagined when I planned the party. Family, togetherness, celebration, love. I moved from group to group, chatting with relatives, catching up on family news, and accepting birthday wishes and compliments on the food. Several people commented on how good everything tasted, how beautifully I had decorated the house, and how wonderful it was to have everyone together. But as the afternoon wore on, I began to notice things, small things at first. The way Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, would roll her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, how she whispered to other family members, and they would glance in my direction with expressions I couldn't quite read. The way conversations seemed to pause when I approached certain groups, only to resume in hushed tones after I walked away. I tried to push these observations out of my mind. This was my birthday party, after all. I was probably just being sensitive, reading too much into innocent interactions. Jennifer had always been a bit distant with me, but I had assumed it was just her personality. She was successful in her career, well-educated, and sometimes I felt like she thought I was beneath her. But surely, she wouldn't cause problems at my birthday celebration. As evening approached, it came time to cut the cake. I had been looking forward to this moment all day. The cake I had spent hours making, decorated with such care and attention to detail. I called everyone into the dining room, and they gathered around the table where my beautiful creation sat in the center, surrounded by gifts that family members had brought. I picked up the cake server, feeling proud of what I had accomplished. The cake looked magnificent, if I do say so myself. The frosting was smooth and perfect. The decorative roses were delicate and artistic, and the whole thing seemed to glow in the warm light of the dining room. This was my moment, my birthday, my cake. My family gathered around me with love and appreciation. But as I lifted the server to make the first cut, Jennifer's voice rang out across the room, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her words cut through the warm atmosphere like a knife through butter, sharp and deliberate and designed to wound. You know what, everyone? I think we need to be honest about something here. Look at her, standing there so proud of her little homemade cake. The truth is, she's just too old, too broke, and too useless to matter anymore. The room fell completely silent for a moment that felt like an eternity. I stood there, cake server in hand, my mouth slightly open in shock, unable to process what I had just heard. My daughter-in-law had just insulted me in the cruelest possible way, in front of my entire family, at my own birthday party, while I held the cake I had made with my own hands. But then, something even worse happened. Instead of rushing to my defense, instead of telling Jennifer that her comment was inappropriate and hurtful, my family began to laugh. First, it was just a few nervous chuckles, but then it grew into full-blown laughter that filled the room. My own children, the ones I had sacrificed everything for, were laughing at their mother being humiliated on her birthday. Marcus laughed the loudest, slapping his knee as if Jennifer had just told the funniest joke he had ever heard. Patrice covered her mouth with her hand, but I could see her shoulders shaking with suppressed giggles. David grinned widely and shook his head as if to say, "Well, she's got a point there." Even my extended family, people I had known and loved for decades, joined in the laughter, as if my pain was entertainment for them. I stood there holding that cake, feeling smaller and more insignificant than I had ever felt in my entire life. The cake that had seemed so beautiful just moments before now felt heavy in my hands, a symbol of my own foolishness. How naive I had been to think that my family actually respected me, actually valued me, actually saw me as anything more than an aging woman who had outlived her usefulness. The laughter seemed to go on forever, echoing off the walls of my dining room and bouncing back at me from every direction. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and hurt, but I couldn't seem to move or speak or do anything except stand there and absorb the humiliation that was being heaped upon me by the people I loved most in the world. Jennifer wasn't finished. She continued her verbal assault while everyone else was still laughing, her voice getting louder and more confident with each word. "I mean, seriously, look around this little house. Look at this sad little party. She's living on Social Security and whatever scraps she can manage, trying to pretend like she's still relevant. But let's face it, what does she actually contribute to this family anymore? Nothing. Absolutely nothing." More laughter followed, and I felt something inside me breaking. Not just my heart, but something deeper. My sense of worth, my understanding of my place in the world, my belief that family meant something sacred and unbreakable. All of it crumbling like a house of cards in a strong wind. She spends her days watching soap operas and clipping coupons. Jennifer continued, her voice dripping with disdain. She can't even afford to take us out to a decent restaurant for her own birthday party. Instead, we get this little home-cooked meal and a homemade cake, like we're all still children. It's honestly just sad. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell them that I had worked 2 jobs for 20 years to put my children through college, that I had sacrificed my own education, my own career opportunities, my own dreams so that they could have better lives, that every dollar I had ever earned had gone toward making their lives easier and more comfortable, that the reason I was living on Social Security now was because I had given everything I had to them. But the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight and constricted, and my eyes were beginning to fill with tears that I was desperately trying to hold back. I refused to cry in front of these people who were treating me like a joke. I refused to give them that satisfaction. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I said absolutely nothing. I stood there in complete silence, holding that cake, looking at each face in the room, my children, who owed their success to my sacrifices, my grandchildren, who I had babysat countless times so their parents could go out and enjoy themselves, my extended family, who I had helped through their own difficult times over the years. Not one of them came to my defense. Not one of them told Jennifer that she had gone too far. Not one of them seemed to remember everything I had done for them over the decades. They just kept laughing and nodding along as if Jennifer was speaking absolute truth about my worthlessness. The silence stretched on, and eventually the laughter began to die down. People started to look a little uncomfortable, perhaps beginning to realize that maybe the joke had gone too far. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The words had been spoken, and they couldn't be taken back. I carefully set the cake down on the table, my hands surprisingly steady, despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. I looked around the room one more time, memorizing the faces of the people who had just shown me exactly what they thought of me. Then, without saying a single word, I walked out of my own dining room, through my own living room, and up the stairs to my bedroom. I could hear them downstairs, their voices becoming animated again, as they apparently decided to continue the party without me. Someone turned on music. I heard the sound of my cake being cut and served. The same cake they had just mocked, along with the woman who made it. They were eating my food in my house, celebrating my birthday, while treating me like I was invisible. That night, I lay in my bed, listening to the sounds of my family enjoying themselves without me. They stayed late, and I could hear them laughing and talking as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just destroyed their mother and grandmother's heart in the most public and humiliating way possible, as if my feelings didn't matter at all. But as I lay there in the darkness, something began to change inside me. The hurt and embarrassment were still there, burning in my chest like acid. But underneath those feelings, something else was growing, something cold and hard and determined. They thought I was too old, too broke, and too useless to matter. They had made that very clear. What they didn't know was that I had been planning for my future and theirs for many years. What they didn't know was that their assumptions about my financial situation were not entirely accurate. What they didn't know was that tomorrow morning, everything was going to change in ways they never could have imagined. But that night, I simply lay in my bed and listened to them celebrate my birthday without me, knowing that it would be the last time they would ever have the opportunity to treat me with such disrespect. The next morning came with an unusual stillness. I woke up before dawn, as had become my habit in recent years. But instead of the usual weight of another ordinary day pressing down on me, I felt something different, something that had crystallized during those long hours of listening to my family celebrate downstairs, while I lay forgotten in my own bedroom. It was clarity, sharp and bright as a blade. I made my coffee in the quiet kitchen, the same kitchen where I had baked that cake they had mocked just hours before. The dining room still showed signs of the party. Paper plates scattered on the table, crumbs from my homemade cake ground into the carpet, empty cups abandoned on every surface. They had left the mess for me to clean up, of course, even on my birthday, even after humiliating me in front of everyone. They still expected me to be the maid, but I didn't clean it up. Instead, I sat at my small kitchen table with my coffee and thought about the phone call I needed to make. A phone call that would set everything in motion. A phone call that would reveal truths my family had never bothered to learn about the woman they thought they knew so well. You see, there were things about my life that my children had never asked about. Details about my past, my relationships, my financial decisions over the years, that they had simply assumed they understood. They saw an old woman living in a modest house, clipping coupons and making homemade cakes, and they thought they knew the whole story. They thought they knew exactly how much their mother was worth, exactly what she had to offer, exactly what her future held. They were wrong about all of it. At 8 o'clock sharp, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I had been calling once a month for the past 15 years. The voice that answered was warm and familiar, tinged with a slight accent that always reminded me of Sunday afternoons and long conversations about life. "Mrs. Patterson, how are you this morning?" came the voice of Harold Whitman, my attorney. Not just any attorney, but one of the most respected estate planning lawyers in the city. A man who had been handling my affairs for over a decade, who knew secrets about my financial situation that would shock my family into silence. "Harold," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in months, "I need you to schedule a family meeting. Today, if possible. It's time." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Harold had been expecting this call for years, ever since we had first discussed the provisions I wanted to include in my estate planning. He knew about the birthday party because I had mentioned it to him weeks ago, how excited I was to celebrate with my family. He also knew about the backup plans I had put in place, just in case my family ever showed me exactly who they really were. "Are you certain this is what you want to do?" he asked gently. "Once we take this step, there's no going back. Your family will learn things about your financial situation that will change their perspective permanently." I thought about Jennifer's voice ringing through my dining room. Too old, too broke, too useless to matter. I thought about my children's laughter, the way they had joined in the mockery, as if I were nothing more than a punchline to a cruel joke. I thought about how they had stayed downstairs, celebrating, while their mother cried herself to sleep on her birthday. "I'm certain," I said. "Set it up for this afternoon. Tell them it's regarding my estate, and that attendance is mandatory. Don't give them any other details." "Understood," Harold replied. "I'll make the calls and send out the formal notices. Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know that I think you're making the right decision. What happened last night was unacceptable, and it's time they learn the truth about the woman they've been taking for granted." After I hung up with Harold, I took a long shower and dressed carefully in my best black dress. The same dress I had worn to important occasions for years. The one that made me feel dignified and strong. I styled my hair with more care than usual and put on the pearl earrings that had been my mother's. If today was going to be the day my family learned who I really was, I wanted to look the part. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly. First Marcus, then Patrice, then David, all of them confused and concerned about the mysterious meeting their grandmother's lawyer had scheduled. They wanted to know what was going on, why it was so urgent, whether I was sick or in some kind of legal trouble. I let every call go to voicemail. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Let them spend a few hours feeling uncertain and anxious, the way I had felt standing in my dining room, holding that cake, while they laughed at my expense. The meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock at Harold's law office downtown. I arrived early and sat in the elegant conference room, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. Harold brought me tea, and we reviewed the documents one final time. Everything was in order, just as we had planned it years ago, when I first realized that my children might not be the grateful, loving people I had raised them to be. At exactly 3 o'clock, they began filing into the conference room. Marcus arrived first, looking nervous in his expensive suit. He worked in finance and was used to dealing with lawyers and formal meetings, but something about this situation clearly had him rattled. Jennifer was with him, her confidence from the night before replaced by obvious anxiety about why she had been included in a legal meeting about my estate. Patrice came next with her husband, Thomas, both of them whispering to each other as they took their seats around the large mahogany table. David showed up last as usual, but for once he wasn't smiling. The gravity of the situation seemed to have finally penetrated even his casual attitude toward life. "Good afternoon, everyone," Harold began, his professional demeanor commanding immediate attention. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We're here today to discuss Mrs. Patterson's estate planning and some recent changes she has decided to make." I watched their faces carefully as Harold spoke. I could see the wheels turning in their minds, the assumptions they were making about why this meeting had been called. They probably thought I was going to divide up my meager possessions, maybe give them power of attorney over my finances, perhaps move into some kind of assisted living facility. They thought they were here to learn about the modest inheritance they might someday receive from their poor old mother. A little house, maybe a few $1,000s in savings, perhaps some sentimental jewelry and family photos. They had no idea what was actually about to happen. "Before we begin," Harold continued, "I want to make sure everyone understands that what we discuss in this room today is confidential and legally binding. Mrs. Patterson has asked me to share certain information about her financial situation that may come as a surprise to some of you." Jennifer leaned forward slightly, and I could see the calculating look in her eyes. Even now, even after what she had done to me the night before, she was probably thinking about money, wondering if the old woman she had called too broke to matter might actually have something worth inheriting after all. "Mom," Marcus interrupted, "before we start, I want to apologize for last night. Jennifer was out of line, and we all should have said something. The whole thing got out of hand, and we feel terrible about it." The others murmured their agreement, offering half-hearted apologies that sounded more like damage control than genuine remorse. They could sense that something important was happening, that their behavior the night before might have consequences they hadn't anticipated. But it was too late for apologies. Far too late. "Let's begin with some basic facts about Mrs. Patterson's financial portfolio," Harold said, opening the thick folder in front of him. "I think you'll find this information quite illuminating." He began reading numbers, account balances, investment portfolios, property values, business holdings. With each figure, he announced, I watched my family's expressions change from confusion to surprise to absolute shock. The modest house they thought was my only asset was actually one of 12 properties I owned throughout the city. The Social Security they assumed was my only income was supplemented by rental payments, dividend checks, and returns on investments I had been making for decades. The woman they thought was clipping coupons out of necessity had actually been building wealth systematically and strategically for over 20 years. The total value of Mrs. Patterson's estate, Harold announced, is currently estimated at $4.7 million. The silence in that room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Jennifer's mouth fell open in a way that would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. Marcus looked like someone had just told him the sky was green. Patrice actually gasped out loud, her hand flying to her chest in shock. $4.7 million. The woman they had called to, broke to matter, was worth nearly $5 million. But Harold wasn't finished. He was just getting started. Now, he continued, let's discuss the recent changes Mrs. Patterson has made to her will and estate planning, effective as of this morning. My children look like they had been struck by lightning. $4.7 million. The number hung in the air like smoke from a fire they couldn't put out. I sat perfectly still in my chair, watching as everything they thought they knew about their mother crumbled before their eyes. Jennifer's face had gone completely white. The same woman who had stood in my dining room just 18 hours ago, telling everyone I was too broke to matter, was now staring at Harold like he had just spoken in a foreign language. Her hands were trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the conference table, and I could see her mind racing, trying to process what this meant for her future. I don't understand, Marcus finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, how is this possible? You live so modestly. You clip coupons. You make your own clothes. We thought. You thought a lot of things, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since the meeting had begun. You thought you knew everything about my life, based on what you could see on the surface. You never bothered to ask about the things you couldn't see. Harold shuffled through his papers and pulled out another document. Mrs. Patterson began building this portfolio shortly after her husband passed away 35 years ago. She took the life insurance money and started investing wisely. She bought rental properties when the market was low. She put money into stocks and bonds consistently over the decades. Every sacrifice she made for her children, every dollar she saved by living modestly, went into building this estate. I remembered those early days after their father died, working 2 jobs, coming home exhausted, sitting at this same kitchen table with financial newspapers spread out before me, learning about investments and real estate markets. My children never saw those late nights when I educated myself about money management. They never knew about the meetings with financial advisors, the careful research I did before making each investment decision. They saw a woman making peanut butter sandwiches for lunch and driving an old car, and they assumed that was the whole story. They never considered that their mother might be brilliant with money. They never imagined that the woman who raised them had the intelligence and determination to build serious wealth over time. The rental properties alone generate approximately $12,000 per month in passive income. Harold continued. The stock portfolio has performed exceptionally well over the years, particularly the technology investments Mrs. Patterson made in the 1990s. The real estate holdings have appreciated significantly, especially the commercial properties downtown. David was shaking his head in disbelief. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell us? Why did you let us think you were struggling financially?" I looked at my youngest son, the one who had laughed the loudest when Jennifer called me useless, because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer you except love. I wanted to know if you valued me as a person or just as a source of potential inheritance. The truth was starting to dawn on them. Their behavior over the years, the way they had treated me, the assumptions they had made about my worth, all of it was being exposed under the harsh light of reality. They were beginning to understand that they had been tested without knowing it, and they had failed spectacularly. "Now," Harold said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "let's discuss the changes Mrs. Patterson made to her will this morning in light of recent events." He opened a fresh folder and pulled out a document that looked official and intimidating. The original will, drafted 15 years ago, left the entire estate divided equally among Mrs. Patterson's 3 children, with provisions for the grandchildren's education and some charitable donations. I saw relief flicker across their faces. Even after everything that had happened, they were still thinking about money, still calculating what they might inherit, still seeing me as a source of wealth, rather than as a human being they had deeply wounded. "However," Harold continued, "as of 9 o'clock this morning, that will has been completely revised." The relief vanished instantly, replaced by a fear so palpable I could almost taste it in the air. Jennifer leaned forward in her chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the table. Marcus loosened his tie as if it were choking him. Patrice looked like she might be sick. The new will reflects Mrs. Patterson's wishes regarding how her estate should be distributed based on recent revelations about her family's true feelings toward her. Harold began reading from the document, his voice clear and professional. "To my son Marcus, who laughed when his wife called me too old, too broke, and too useless to matter, I leave the sum of $1, along with my hope that he will learn the value of respect for the woman who sacrificed everything to raise him." Marcus's face went ashen. $1. After nearly $5 million in total assets, his inheritance was $1. To my daughter Patrice, who stood by silently while I was humiliated at my own birthday party, who covered her mouth to hide her laughter at my expense, I leave the sum of $1, along with the knowledge that her silence spoke louder than any words could have. Patrice started crying, quiet tears streaming down her cheeks. But I felt no sympathy for her. She had made her choice when she chose to join in the mockery instead of defending her mother. To my son David, who grinned with approval when his mother was called worthless, I leave the sum of $1, along with my disappointment in the man he has become. David's mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. He looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. What could he say? The damage was done, and we all knew it. To my daughter-in-law Jennifer, Harold continued, and I saw her flinch at the sound of her own name, who orchestrated the public humiliation of an elderly woman at her own birthday celebration. I leave nothing, not 1 cent, not one possession, nothing at all. Jennifer let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Her hands flew to her face, and she began crying in earnest. Real tears this time, not the crocodile tears she had probably planned to use to manipulate me into forgiveness. "The remainder of the estate," Harold announced, totaling approximately $4.7 million, will be donated to various charities that support elderly individuals who have been abandoned or mistreated by their families. The silence that followed was deafening. My entire family sat in stunned disbelief, processing the fact that they had just lost millions of dollars because of one night of cruelty. Because they had chosen to laugh instead of love, because they had revealed their true characters when they thought it didn't matter. There are additional provisions, Harold continued. Mrs. Patterson's house, the one where last night's incident occurred, will be sold immediately. The proceeds will also go to charity. Mrs. Patterson will be moving to a luxury retirement community where she can live comfortably among people who appreciate her worth. I had already put a deposit down on a beautiful apartment in Golden Years Manor, the most exclusive senior living community in the city. It had a golf course, a spa, gourmet dining, and most importantly, it was filled with people who treated each other with dignity and respect. People who understood that age brought wisdom, not worthlessness. Marcus finally found his voice. Mom, please, you can't do this. We made a mistake. We're sorry. We didn't mean what happened last night. We love you. You're our mother. I looked at him with the same cold expression I had perfected over the past 18 hours. You love my money, I said simply. You love what you thought I could give you someday. But you don't love me. If you loved me, you would never have allowed someone to speak to me the way Jennifer did. If you loved me, you would have stood up for me instead of laughing along. Patrice was sobbing openly now. Mama, please, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I should have said something. I should have stopped it. Please don't do this to us. Think about your grandchildren. They need their inheritance for college, for their futures. My grandchildren will be fine, I replied. Their parents can work to pay for their education, just like I worked to pay for yours, just like millions of other families do every day, without expecting handouts from elderly relatives. The truth was, I had already set up small trust funds for each grandchild, completely separate from this will. Money for their education and a modest start in life. But their parents didn't need to know that. Their parents needed to learn what it felt like to lose everything because of their own poor choices. Jennifer had stopped crying and was now looking at me with something approaching hatred. The mask had completely fallen away, and I could see her true nature clearly for the first time. This is insane, she said, her voice shaking with rage. You're destroying your own family over one stupid comment. You're being vindictive and cruel. I smiled for the first time since entering that conference room. I'm being exactly what you said I was, Jennifer. I'm being too old, too broke, and too useless to matter. If that's truly what you believe about me, then my money shouldn't matter to you either. Harold cleared his throat and pulled out another set of documents. There are additional provisions that I need to make you aware of. Mrs. Patterson has also decided to call in some outstanding loans. More silence, more confusion on their faces. Over the years, Mrs. Patterson has provided financial assistance to various family members. Down payments on houses, car loans, credit card debt relief, emergency funds. She has detailed records of every transaction, including signed promissory notes for amounts that were supposed to be repaid. I had kept meticulous records of every dollar I had ever given my children. Every time one of them had called with a financial emergency. Every time they needed help with a major purchase. Every time they had promised to pay me back someday. The somedays had never come, of course, but the paperwork was still valid. Marcus, you currently owe your mother $68,000 for the down payment on your current house, plus interest accrued over 8 years. The total amount due is now $94,000. Marcus looked like he might faint. He had probably forgotten all about that loan, conveniently assuming it was just another gift from his generous mother. Patrice, your outstanding balance is $42,000 for various emergency loans and credit card payments, plus interest. The current total due is $58,000. Patrice was crying again, but these weren't tears of remorse. These were tears of panic as she realized the financial hole she was about to find herself in. David, your balance is $36,000 for car loans and personal debt relief, bringing your current total to $49,000. David was staring at the table, probably calculating whether he even had that much money available, probably realizing that he didn't. All of these loans are being called in immediately, Harold announced. Payment in full is due within 30 days, or Mrs. Patterson will be forced to take legal action to recover the funds. The mathematical reality was hitting them all at once. Not only were they losing their inheritance, they now owed me over $200,000 that they probably didn't have. Money they had spent years ago, money they had assumed would never need to be repaid. This is impossible, Marcus said, his voice cracking. We don't have that kind of cash available. Our houses, our investments, everything is tied up. You're asking us to liquidate our entire lives to pay you back money you gave us years ago. Money I loaned you, I corrected. Money you promised to repay. I have your signatures on every promissory note. Harold, show them the documents. Harold spread out copies of the loan agreements across the table. My children's signatures were clearly visible on each one, along with the terms they had agreed to when they desperately needed my help. Terms they had ignored for years, assuming their mother was too soft-hearted to ever enforce them. You planned this, Jennifer accused, her voice venomous. You set us up. You've been planning this revenge for years. I looked at her with complete calm. I planned for the possibility that my family might not be who I hoped they were. I prepared for the chance that the people I sacrificed everything for might someday show me their true colors. Last night, you gave me all the proof I needed. The meeting continued for another hour as Harold went through additional details: the timeline for vacating my house, the process for collecting the outstanding loans, the legal procedures that would be followed if payment wasn't made on time, the finality of the will changes, and the impossibility of contesting them, given that I was clearly of sound mind and had documented reasons for my decisions. By the time we finished, my family looked like survivors of a natural disaster, shocked, devastated, and completely unprepared for the reality that was about to become their new life. They filed out of the conference room in stunned silence, not even bothering to say goodbye. I remained seated as Harold gathered his papers, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The weight of pretending, of hoping, of believing in people who had never deserved my faith had finally been lifted from my shoulders. How do you feel? Harold asked gently. I thought about the question for a long moment. How did I feel? Sad, certainly, for the family relationships that were now permanently broken. Disappointed in the people my children had become. But underneath those feelings was something else, something stronger and more sustaining. Free, I said finally. For the first time in decades, I feel completely free. Free. That evening, I drove to my new apartment at Golden Years Manor for the first time as its newest resident. The moving truck had already delivered the few possessions I had chosen to keep from my old house. Everything else would be sold along with the property, just as Harold had explained to my family hours earlier. The apartment was beautiful, far more luxurious than anything I had ever allowed myself to enjoy. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a pristine garden. Gleaming hardwood floors stretched throughout the spacious rooms, and the kitchen was equipped with professional-grade appliances I had only dreamed of owning. But the most beautiful thing about it was the silence. No phone calls asking for money. No unexpected visits from people who only wanted something from me. Just peace. I poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle I had been saving for years, waiting for a special occasion that had never seemed to come. Tonight felt special enough. I sat in my new living room, surrounded by boxes containing the remnants of my old life, and allowed myself to truly process what had happened. My phone had been ringing constantly since the meeting ended. First Marcus, then Patrice, then David, all of them calling repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. I listened to a few of them out of curiosity more than anything else. Marcus sounded panicked as he tried to explain how the loan repayment would bankrupt him and Jennifer. His mortgage, his children's private school tuition, their country club membership, the expensive cars they drove. All of it was financed based on the assumption that he would someday inherit significant money from his mother. Now he was facing financial ruin, and I could hear the terror in his voice. Patrice's messages were filled with tears and pleas for forgiveness. She kept saying she was sorry, that she had made a terrible mistake, that she would do anything to make it right. But her apologies felt hollow and desperate, motivated by fear of losing money, rather than genuine remorse for hurting me. She wanted forgiveness not because she understood what she had done wrong, but because she needed my financial mercy to survive. David's calls were different, angry, accusatory. He blamed me for destroying the family, for being vindictive and cruel, for punishing them all because of Jennifer's stupid comment. He couldn't seem to understand that this wasn't about one comment. This was about years of being taken for granted, years of being valued only for what I could provide, years of being treated like an ATM with feelings instead of a human being deserving of respect. I deleted all the messages without responding. There was nothing left to say to any of them. Over the following weeks, I watched from my new apartment as the consequences of that birthday party rippled through their lives like stones thrown into still water. Harold kept me informed of the developments, not because I asked him to, but because the legal proceedings required my attention as the creditor calling in their loans. Marcus was the first to crack under the pressure. Within 2 weeks, he had put his house on the market, but the real estate market was slow, and he couldn't wait for a buyer. He took out a high-interest loan against his retirement fund to try to make the payment, but it wasn't enough. The stress was affecting his work performance, and there were rumors at his company that his position might be in jeopardy. Jennifer had to take a second job for the first time in years. The woman who had called me too broke to matter was now working evenings at a department store, folding clothes and dealing with difficult customers just to help make ends meet. The irony was not lost on me. She had gone from looking down on my modest lifestyle to living it herself practically overnight. Patrice's situation was perhaps the most dramatic. She and her husband were forced to pull their children out of private school and sell their vacation home. The family dinners at expensive restaurants became brown bag lunches at the kitchen table. Patrice had to get a job as a substitute teacher, work she hadn't done in over a decade, just to try to keep their heads above water financially. David's response was to try to borrow money from anyone who would listen. He approached distant relatives, old friends, even former co-workers, spinning tales about a family emergency and promising to repay them quickly. But word traveled fast in our social circles about what had really happened. People knew about the birthday party, about the will changes, about the loan collections. Nobody wanted to get involved in what they saw as a mess of his own making. None of them could make the full payments within the 30-day deadline Harold had given them, which meant, according to the terms of their original loan agreements, I could take legal action to recover the money. And that's exactly what I did. The lawsuits were filed quietly, but effectively. Liens were placed on their remaining properties. Wage garnishments were set up to collect portions of their paychecks directly. Bank accounts were frozen pending court orders to release funds. The legal system moved slowly, but inexorably, grinding through their financial lives, like a machine designed to extract every penny they owed me. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but I felt no guilt either. They had made their choices, and choices have consequences. They had chosen to humiliate me when they thought I was powerless to respond. Now they were learning what it felt like to be powerless themselves. Meanwhile, my own life was blossoming in ways I had never expected. The retirement community was filled with fascinating people who had lived rich, full lives and had stories to share. There was Margaret, a former diplomat who spoke 6 languages and had traveled to every continent. There was Robert, a retired professor who taught informal philosophy classes in the community center. There was Helen, a former Broadway dancer who still moved with the grace of someone half her age. For the first time in decades, I was surrounded by people who valued intelligence, experience, and wisdom. People who understood that growing older didn't make you less worthy of respect, but more deserving of it. People who saw the accumulation of years as an achievement rather than a burden. I joined the book club and discovered I had opinions about literature that people actually wanted to hear. I started taking art classes and found I had a talent for watercolor painting that had been dormant for 40 years. I learned to play bridge and became competitive enough to represent our community in regional tournaments. Most importantly, I was learning to spend money on myself without guilt. The woman who had clipped coupons and made her own clothes for decades was now shopping at boutiques and eating at fine restaurants. I bought fresh flowers for my apartment every week simply because they made me happy. I hired a housekeeper so I could spend my time on activities I enjoyed rather than on endless cleaning. I purchased a new car, not because my old one had broken down, but because I wanted something comfortable and reliable that reflected my true financial status. 6 months after that terrible birthday party, I received a letter that made me smile for the first time in weeks. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, representing Jennifer in what appeared to be divorce proceedings. She was trying to protect whatever assets she had left from Marcus's financial collapse by ending their marriage. The woman who had stood in my dining room calling me useless was now abandoning the man she had married, presumably because he could no longer provide the lifestyle she demanded. The divorce would only make things worse for both of them financially. Legal fees, division of assets, separate households to maintain. All of it would drain whatever resources they had managed to preserve. Their children would be caught in the middle, their college funds probably depleted, their stable family life destroyed by the greed and cruelty their parents had chosen to display that night. Marcus called me one final time, about 8 months after the meeting at Harold's office. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up the phone. His voice was barely recognizable. The confident, successful man who had laughed at his mother's humiliation, sounded broken and defeated. He told me that Jennifer was gone, that he was facing bankruptcy, that he might lose his job, that his children barely spoke to him anymore because they blamed him for destroying their family's security. He begged me to reconsider, to show mercy, to remember that he was my son and that family should forgive each other. He promised he had learned his lesson, that he understood now how wrong he had been, that he would spend the rest of his life making it up to me if I would just give him another chance. I listened to his entire speech without interrupting. When he was finished, there was a long silence on the phone as he waited for my response. "Marcus," I said finally, my voice calm and steady, "do you remember what Jennifer said about me at my birthday party?" "Yes," he whispered. "She said you were too old, too broke, and too useless to matter." "And what did you do when she said that?" Another long pause. I laughed. "You didn't just laugh, Marcus. You laughed the loudest. You slapped your knee like it was the funniest thing you had ever heard. Your mother was standing there holding a cake she had made with her own hands, being humiliated on her birthday, and you thought it was hilarious." I could hear him crying on the other end of the phone. Real tears this time. Not the manipulative kind he might have used as a child to get out of trouble. "I know," he sobbed. "I know I was wrong. I hate myself for it. I think about it every day. Please, Mom, please forgive me. I'll do anything." "You'll do anything now," I said. "Now that you need something from me. Now that you're facing the consequences of your choices. But where was this remorse when I needed you? Where was this love and respect when I was standing in that room, being torn apart by your wife while you watched and laughed?" The silence stretched on for nearly a minute. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice barely audible. "What can I do? How can I fix this?" "You can't," I replied simply. "Some things, once broken, cannot be repaired. Some words, once spoken, cannot be taken back. Some laughter, once heard, cannot be forgotten. You made your choice that night, Marcus. Now you have to live with it." I hung up the phone and turned it off completely. There would be no more calls, no more pleas, no more attempts at reconciliation. The bridge between us had been burned so completely that not even ashes remained. That night, I sat in my beautiful apartment, surrounded by the life I had built for myself, and I realized something profound. For 70 years, I had measured my worth by how much I could give to other people, how much money I could provide, how much help I could offer, how much of myself I could sacrifice for the happiness of others. I had believed that love meant giving until it hurt, and then giving some more. But I had been wrong about everything. Real love doesn't require you to diminish yourself to lift others up. Real love doesn't ask you to bankrupt yourself financially or emotionally. Real love doesn't laugh when you're being humiliated and then expect forgiveness when the consequences come due. The people in my new community loved me for who I was, not for what I could provide. They valued my conversation, my company, my wisdom, my friendship. They saw me as a whole person worthy of respect and affection, not as a resource to be exploited until depleted. I was finally learning what it meant to matter, not because of my money or my usefulness, but simply because I was a human being deserving of dignity. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. The birthday party that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of the life I was always meant to live. A life where I mattered not because of what I could give, but because of who I was. A life where my worth wasn't measured in dollars spent on ungrateful children, but in the respect and love of people who truly valued me. They had called me too old, too broke, and too useless to matter. They had been wrong about all of it. I wasn't too old to start over. I wasn't too broke to live well. And I certainly wasn't too useless to matter. In fact, I mattered more than I ever had before. Just not to them. And finally, after decades of misplaced devotion, that was perfectly fine with me. Was perfectly fine with me. A year passed, and I had settled into a rhythm of contentment I had never known existed. My days were filled with activities that nourished my soul rather than drained it. I painted watercolors in the morning light, streaming through my apartment windows. I played bridge with friends who appreciated my strategic mind. I took cooking classes, where I learned to make dishes I had never had time to explore, when I was busy preparing meals for people who took my efforts for granted. The charitable donations I had made were already changing lives in ways that filled my heart with genuine purpose. The Elder Care Foundation had used my contribution to open a new facility for seniors who had been abandoned by their families. They named a wing after me, not because I demanded recognition, but because they wanted to honor someone who understood their mission from personal experience. I attended the dedication ceremony and met dozens of elderly people whose stories echoed my own. People who had given everything to their families, only to discover that their love had been conditional on their usefulness. One woman, Mrs. Dorothy Williams, reminded me so much of myself that we became instant friends. She had raised 4 children as a single mother after her husband died in Vietnam, working 3 jobs to put them all through college. When she could no longer work and needed help with basic care, those same children had put her in the cheapest nursing home they could find and rarely visited. The day she moved into our new facility, paid for by my donation, she cried tears of gratitude that someone finally saw her value as a human being. These were the relationships that filled my life now. People who understood sacrifice, who appreciated kindness, who knew the difference between being loved and being used. Every conversation was meaningful. Every shared meal was pleasant. Every day brought new opportunities for genuine connection. My former family, meanwhile, continued their downward spiral with a predictability that would have been amusing if it weren't so pathetic. Harold kept me informed of the legal proceedings, not because I asked for updates, but because my signature was required on various documents as their creditor. The garnishments were working slowly, but steadily, taking portions of their paychecks each month to pay down their debts to me. The process would take years, ensuring that my birthday party humiliation would cost them financially for a very long time. Jennifer's divorce from Marcus had been finalized, and the settlement had left both of them in worse shape than before. She had moved back in with her parents, a woman in her 40s living in her childhood bedroom, working retail jobs she considered beneath her. The expensive clothes she had once worn were replaced by the uniform polo shirts of whatever store would hire her. Her social media presence, once filled with photos of luxury vacations and designer handbags, now featured inspirational quotes about overcoming adversity and starting over. Marcus had been forced to take a job with a different company at a significant pay cut. His new position required him to travel extensively, which meant he rarely saw his children anymore. The house he had been so proud of was gone, sold to pay debts, and he now lived in a small apartment across town. His children, confused and angry about their parents' divorce and their family's financial collapse, blamed him for everything that had gone wrong. The relationship he had once had with them was as broken as his relationship with me. Patrice's situation was perhaps the most ironic. The daughter who had covered her mouth to hide her laughter at my expense was now working as a caregiver for elderly patients, helping them with daily tasks and providing companionship. It was honest work, but the pay was modest, and she struggled to make ends meet even with her husband's income. She had to do for strangers what she had never been willing to do for her own mother: show patience, kindness, and respect to elderly people who needed care and attention. David had moved back in with his ex-girlfriend, a relationship he had previously ended because he thought he could do better. Now he was grateful for anyone willing to split the rent and help him manage his crushing debt load. He worked 2 jobs, one during the day at a car dealership and another in the evenings delivering food for a smartphone app. The man, who had grinned with approval when his mother was called useless, now spent his nights driving around town, bringing meals to people who could afford to have dinner delivered, while he ate fast food in his car between deliveries. None of them had attempted to contact me in months. They had finally realized that their pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears, that their mother was not the soft-hearted pushover they had taken advantage of for so many years. The woman who had once rushed to help them with every financial crisis was gone, replaced by someone who valued herself enough to demand respect. I received Christmas cards from my grandchildren that year, forwarded through Harold's office so they wouldn't have my new address. The cards were clearly chosen and signed by the children themselves, not orchestrated by their parents as previous years' cards had been. They were simple, heartfelt messages expressing love for their grandmother and confusion about why they couldn't see me anymore. These cards broke my heart in ways that their parents' desperate phone calls never could. I had Harold set up college funds for each grandchild, substantial accounts that would ensure their education, regardless of their parents' financial struggles. But I made sure the funds were structured so that the money could only be used for legitimate educational expenses and would be distributed directly to the schools, not to their parents. My grandchildren would not suffer for their parents' cruelty, but their parents would not benefit from my generosity either. The irony of my situation was not lost on me. I was now wealthier than I had ever been, not just because of my investments, but because I was no longer supporting 3 additional households. The money I had been spending on their rent, their emergencies, their wants and needs was now mine to use as I pleased. I could afford luxuries I had never even considered when I was busy financing their comfortable lives. I bought myself a beautiful new wardrobe, clothes that fit properly and made me feel elegant rather than invisible. I hired a personal trainer who helped me regain strength and flexibility I had lost over the years. I got regular manicures and pedicures, small indulgences that made me feel pampered and valued. I purchased season tickets to the symphony and discovered a love for classical music I had never had time to explore. Most importantly, I was learning to say no without guilt. When other residents asked me to chair committees or organize events, I evaluated each request based on my own interests and availability, rather than automatically agreeing out of obligation. When charitable organizations contacted me for donations, I gave generously to causes I cared about, but refused to be pressured into supporting every request that came my way. The woman who had once been available to everyone else's needs was finally prioritizing her own happiness, and the result was a sense of peace I had never experienced. I woke up each morning excited about the day ahead, rather than worried about which family member might call with a crisis that required my immediate attention in financial assistance. 2 years after the birthday party that changed everything, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my apartment reading when the concierge called to say someone was asking to see me. A young woman who claimed to be my granddaughter, but wouldn't give her name. I told him to send her up, curiosity overriding my usual caution about contact with my former family. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with Marcus's oldest daughter, Sarah, now 19, and clearly struggling with something important. She looked so much like I had at her age that it took my breath away for a moment. The same determined set to her jaw, the same intelligent eyes, the same way of holding herself that suggested strength beneath a delicate exterior. "Grandma," she said softly, "I know I'm not supposed to be here. I know you don't want to see any of us anymore. But I had to come. I had to tell you something." I invited her in and made tea, the same ritual I had performed thousands of times when she was a little girl and would visit me after school. We sat in my living room, the silence stretching between us as she gathered her courage to speak. "I remember that night," she finally said. "Your birthday party. I was upstairs doing homework when it happened, but I heard everything. I heard what Jennifer said about you, and I heard everyone laughing. I wanted to come downstairs and defend you, but I was too scared. I was 17, and I didn't know how to stand up to all the adults." Her words stirred emotions I thought I had buried completely. This child, who had been just a teenager when her family destroyed itself, had carried guilt about that night for 2 years. "I need you to know that not everyone laughed," she continued, tears streaming down her face. "I was crying upstairs, angry at my parents, angry at Jennifer, angry at myself for being too cowardly to speak up. And I need you to know that what they did was wrong, and I'm sorry, and I miss you every single day." I reached across the table and took her hands in mine, feeling the warmth of genuine love for the first time in years. This young woman had risked her parents' anger by coming to see me. She had found my address somehow, traveled across town, and was brave enough to apologize for something that hadn't even been her fault. "Sarah," I said gently, "you were a child. You had no responsibility to fix the situation your parents and Jennifer created. The fact that you felt bad about it, that you wanted to defend me, that you remember it with regret, that tells me everything I need to know about the person you're becoming." We talked for hours. She told me about college, about her plans to become a social worker specializing in elder care, inspired partly by what she had witnessed happen to me. She told me about her parents' struggles, not to make me feel guilty, but to help me understand how completely their lives had fallen apart. She told me about her younger brother, who was angry and confused about the family's financial problems, but too young to understand the connection to that terrible birthday party. Most importantly, she told me that she loved me, not because of anything I could give her, but because I was her grandmother, and she cherished the memories of our relationship before everything went wrong. She asked for nothing except the chance to see me again, to rebuild some kind of connection that wasn't based on money or obligation. For the first time since that birthday party, I felt the stirring of something that might eventually become forgiveness, not for her parents, who had made their choices and would live with the consequences, but for this brave young woman who had grown up watching her family's greed destroy everything good in their lives and had decided to choose a different path. I gave Sarah my phone number and told her she was welcome to visit any time. I also told her about the college fund I had established for her, money that would ensure she could pursue her education without depending on her financially struggling parents. The look of relief and gratitude on her face reminded me why I had started that fund in the first place. Not to help Marcus and Jennifer, but to make sure my grandchildren had opportunities despite their parents' failures. After Sarah left, I sat in my apartment thinking about the unexpected gift her visit had given me. For 2 years, I had believed that my entire family was lost to me, that everyone I had loved had chosen greed over genuine affection. But Sarah's courage in coming to see me had shown me that love could survive even the most devastating betrayals, that goodness could emerge from the wreckage of broken relationships, that redemption was possible even when it seemed impossible. I called Harold the next day and asked him to set up a separate trust fund for Sarah, one that would provide her with financial security throughout her life, as long as she continued to show the character and integrity she had demonstrated by coming to see me. I also asked him to research her career goals and identify scholarships and internships that might help her achieve them. Sarah became a regular visitor to my apartment, stopping by every few weeks to share her experiences at college and to listen to my stories about the family history she had never heard. Through her, I learned that her younger brother was struggling, but fundamentally decent, and I eventually established a fund for him as well, contingent on him maintaining good grades and staying out of serious trouble. But I made it clear to both grandchildren that their parents would never benefit from these arrangements, that any attempt to share money with Marcus or Jennifer would result in immediate termination of the trusts. The generation that had betrayed me would face the consequences of their choices for the rest of their lives. The generation that had been caught in the crossfire of their parents' greed would have opportunities to build better lives for themselves. 3 years after that birthday party, I received a phone call that brought a smile to my face for an entirely unexpected reason. It was from a reporter at the local newspaper who had heard about the charitable foundation I had established and wanted to do a story about my work supporting elderly people who had been abandoned by their families. During the interview, I told my story publicly for the first time. Not all the details, but enough to make it clear that I understood personally what it felt like to be discarded by people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. The article ran on the front page of the Sunday edition with a photograph of me at the elder care facility that bore my name, surrounded by residents whose lives had been transformed by the programs my donation had funded. The response to the article was overwhelming. Letters poured in from elderly people across the city who shared similar stories of family betrayal and abandonment. Social workers reached out to tell me about clients who needed the services my foundation provided. Other wealthy individuals contacted me about making their own donations to support the cause. Most satisfying of all were the calls from people who recognized my former family members' names in the article and wanted to share their own observations about how karma had visited justice upon them. Jennifer's co-workers at the department store, where she folded clothes for minimum wage, had recognized her as the woman who had once looked down on people in service jobs. Marcus's former country club friends had heard about his financial collapse and were quietly pleased to see someone they had always considered arrogant get his comeuppance. Patrice's neighbors had watched her family's lifestyle change dramatically and weren't surprised to learn there was more to the story. The article also generated an unexpected response from someone I had never met, but who knew my story intimately. A woman named Beverly Thompson called to tell me she had been Jennifer's supervisor at the department store and had fired her the previous month for chronic tardiness and a bad attitude toward customers. Jennifer's sense of entitlement and superiority had made her unsuitable for retail work, where success required treating all customers with respect, regardless of their appearance or apparent wealth. Beverly told me that Jennifer had blamed everyone but herself for her problems, constantly complaining about having to work in retail when she was better than that. She had been rude to customers who reminded her of her former mother-in-law, elderly women who shopped carefully and asked questions about prices. Her inability to provide good customer service to the demographic she had once mocked had ultimately cost her even that modest job. The irony was perfect. Jennifer, who had called me too broke to matter, was now too bitter and entitled to succeed, even in the low-paying job she had been forced to take. Her own character flaws had made her unemployable in the very industry where she had ended up after her privileged life collapsed. 4 years after my birthday party revelation, I was thriving in ways I had never imagined possible. My charitable foundation had expanded to serve elderly people in 3 neighboring counties. I had been invited to speak at conferences about elder abuse and family financial exploitation. My story had become a cautionary tale that social workers used to help their clients recognize the warning signs of being manipulated by family members. I had also become something I had never expected to be: wealthy, not just in money, but in genuine relationships. My apartment was filled with friends who valued my company, my wisdom, my humor, and my generous spirit. I hosted dinner parties where the conversation was stimulating and the laughter was kind rather than cruel. I traveled with groups of other active seniors who shared my interests in art, history, and culture. The woman who had once measured her worth by how much she could sacrifice for others had learned to measure it by how much joy and meaning she could create in her own life. And that measurement yielded results that no amount of money given to ungrateful children could ever match. My former family continued their slow descent into the consequences of their choices. The legal garnishments would continue for several more years, ensuring that every paycheck they earned would be reduced by the payments they owed me. Their credit ratings had been destroyed by the financial chaos that followed their greed, making it difficult for them to qualify for loans or mortgages. The comfortable middle-class lives they had taken for granted were gone permanently, replaced by a constant struggle to make ends meet while paying for their past mistakes. But I rarely thought about their suffering anymore. It had become background noise in a life filled with purpose, friendship, and genuine happiness. They had chosen to see me as too old, too broke, and too useless to matter. In trying to diminish me, they had actually freed me to discover just how much I truly mattered to people who were capable of recognizing worth when they saw it. The birthday party that had seemed like the worst day of my life had actually been the first day of my real life. A life where I mattered not because of what I could provide, but because of who I was. And who I was, it turned out, was someone worth celebrating every single day. Worth celebrating every single day. On my 70th birthday, 5 years after that life-changing moment, I received a phone call that would have once sent me into a panic, but now simply made me shake my head in amazement at the predictability of human nature. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was unmistakably familiar, though strained and desperate in a way I had never heard before. "Mama," Patrice's voice cracked through the phone. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm calling because something terrible has happened, and I didn't know who else to turn to." I set down my morning coffee and waited, curious to hear what new crisis had befallen the daughter who had once found my humiliation entertaining enough to cover her mouth and giggle. The woman who now spent her days caring for elderly strangers while having abandoned her own mother was about to ask for help from the person she had written off as worthless. Thomas had a heart attack, she continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. He's in intensive care, and the doctors don't know if he's going to make it. The medical bills are already enormous, and our insurance won't cover everything. I'm going to lose the house, Mama. I'm going to lose everything. The kids are scared and confused, and I don't know what to do. She was crying now, real tears of genuine fear and desperation. The kind of tears I had cried alone in my bedroom after her birthday party performance, except hers were being shed because she was facing financial ruin rather than emotional devastation. The irony was not lost on me that she was experiencing the terror of losing everything she cared about, just as I had lost everything I thought I could count on that terrible night. I know I have no right to ask, she sobbed, but could you please help us? I know you're angry with me. I know I hurt you terribly. But please don't let my children suffer because of my mistakes. I'll do anything, Mama. I'll sign papers giving you back every penny with interest. I'll work 3 jobs if I have to. Just please help my family. The silence stretched between us as I processed her request. Here was my daughter, the same person who had stood in my dining room, watching her sister-in-law destroy her mother's dignity, now begging that same mother to save her from disaster. The woman who had chosen to laugh instead of defend me was now asking me to defend her when she was most vulnerable. Patrice, I said finally, my voice calm and measured, I'm sorry to hear about Thomas's condition. I hope he recovers fully and quickly. I could hear her sharp intake of breath as she waited for me to continue, probably expecting me to tell her that of course I would help, that family was family, that bygones were bygones. She was waiting for me to return to being the woman who had always rushed to solve their problems with my checkbook and my endless capacity for sacrifice. But I'm not that woman anymore, Patrice. That woman died on my 65th birthday, when her family showed her exactly what they thought of her. The woman you're speaking to now has learned something precious about her own worth, and she's not interested in rescuing people who saw her as nothing more than a bank account with feelings. I wish Thomas well, and I hope your children will be okay, but your financial crisis is not my emergency to solve. You made your choice when you chose to laugh instead of love. Now you have to live with it, just like I had to learn to live without the family I thought I had. Goodbye, Patrice. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away from people who don't value you. Sometimes the greatest revenge is living well, while those who hurt you face the natural consequences of their choices. My story isn't just about money, or wills, or family drama. It's about recognizing your worth and refusing to let anyone convince you that you don't matter, because you do matter. And if the people in your life can't see that, maybe it's time to find people who can. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there realize that it's never too late to start valuing yourself the way you deserve to be valued.